bring Keith in and see if he has a remedy for Brett Brown. Brett Brown doesn't seem to have an answer, Keith. He's kind of just throwing his hands up in the air saying someone's got to step up. He's acknowledging this is not ideal. I think everybody acknowledges that it's not ideal, but what do the Sixers do without Ben Simmons?
Yeah, I wasn't really prepared to give a eulogy. I didn't know it was quite that dire.
It always is, Keith.
But it's going to be tough. That's certainly for sure. When you have a unique talent like Ben Simmons, where he's a 6'10" point guard, that's not something that you just have another one of those on your roster. There's maybe 3-4 guys in the entire league that can fill that role with his size and defensive ability, and then of course his creation ability on offense. I think it's just mix and match from here on out. I'm curious to see. I know the other night they went with Horford back in the starting lineup, and they went with Josh Richardson and Shake Milton together as the backcourt. Curious to see if Horford being back in the starting five is a thing for them or not. I'm not sure. That's the way I would have gone. I think if you're going to commit to Horford coming off the bench, you really got to kind of make that your thing, even with Simmons out, and then just piece it together around that with Milton, Raul Neto, Alec Burks, just kind of hopefully you can get through it. Josh Richardson is another guy, too, who should be able to pick up a lot more of the ball handling. He did that quite a bit with the Miami Heat, as he was kind of the de facto point guard in a lineup that didn't really have a true point guard. So I think it's just going to be piecing it together from here on out and trying to hold off Indiana in that 5-6 matchup, while maybe being able to catch Miami for the 4 seed.
Yeah, and I know we don't know how long he's going to be out. They're saying they're going to reevaluate him in 2 weeks. But if he is, in fact, out 2 weeks minimally, let's say 2, 3, 4 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, somewhere in there, do you see the Sixers being able to move up the standings, or is this going to be where they kind of get stuck?
Yeah, it's probably going to be tough. I know they don't have the hardest schedule in the world down the stretch here, but anytime you take away a really good player, it's going to be hard for them to move up. I would almost start looking the other way. As long as you can hold off Indiana, that's probably your best bet there, and that's going to be hard for them. They really want to get to that 4 seed because they've been such a miserable team on the road. So you really want to have that home court advantage in that first round. Now, I know there's some studies out there that tell us that the home road splits in the regular season don't really carry over to the playoffs and not. But Philadelphia is a team that's got a lot of role players. They are relying on a handful of younger players as well. And those guys, history does tell us, those guys do play better at home. So I think that's part of their challenge is there. Miami's a pretty good team that, plays pretty good basketball, and they've got a good amount of home games left as well. So it's going to be hard for them to catch and make up that ground on Miami, even though it's only a half game right now, so I don't want to make it out like it's impossible. It's just going to be hard to catch them.
And Miami hasn't played well either. They lost to the Hawks. They've lost to the Heat, so they've had their own issues. But I'll ask you this. A couple of years ago, Joel Embiid missed, the final 15 or so games. The Sixers ripped off 18 wins, when he was out. Not all of those without him, but 13 of the 18, I think, came without him. Could the Sixers find something? I mean, is this a good thing that they can – get someone some more playing time, find a role for somebody, and elevate a player through this?
Yeah, you can definitely see it that way. You could see it as guys like Burks and Robinson, who are new to the team, are going to be force-fed more minutes now because you've essentially taken out about 35 minutes a night from your lineup with Simmons out of there, and you got to replace that. So those guys probably are going to be primary beneficiaries, so maybe find something there. And then the schedule, it is conducive to winning some games, even if he's going to be out for an extended period beyond even the 2 weeks we know about. So I think that they should be, in okay shape. This isn't a situation where they're not going to tumble completely out. That they've won too many games. They've got a 15-game lead from being out of the playoffs. I know some people went there and said they should just start to maybe think about tanking, and that's just insane. That's not going to be anything that happened down the stretch here for them. So it's going to be tough. They're going to have to get through it. Now, the challenge with Simmons being the guy who's out versus Embiid is it's a little easier to replace the big man. That's no knock on Embiid. He's obviously fantastic, but your offense doesn't necessarily revolve around him having the ball in his hands on every single play as it does with Simmons, and that's tricky because they don't have a ready-made replacement for him on the roster, where in years past they've had another guy who can kind of slide in and give you at least some of what Embiid gives you. Right now, there's nobody who can really give them what Simmons gave them production-wise.
Yeah, Keith, and that's a really interesting point because up to the injury of Ben Simmons with his back, I saw a stat that he has played in 214 out of 221 possible games with the Philadelphia 76ers. He's essentially been an Iron Man. I mean, let's just call it what it is. And it's always been Embiid goes down. How does the team adjust without Embiid? And what happens if the team's successful without Joe, when he comes back? Well, now the roles are reversed. So I ask you just said it, a bigger adjustment with Ben going down. But let's say Brett does a great job here. They buy in. They adjust their identity a little bit. They play great. Embiid steps up to the tall task ahead. How do you envision them figuring it out if and when Ben returns for a playoff run?
Yeah, it's going to be tough because now what you're doing is you're basically changing the way the entire offense will function. I think you're going to see this team play a lot more of a traditional old school style where it is dump it in Embiid a bunch of times in the post and let him go to work. Throw it into Horford and let him do things down there where he hasn't had a lot of those touches and that. Maybe let Horford facilitate the offense some from the top of the key and see what he can make happen. And then when Simmons gets back, now you have to go back to basically saying, all right, here's our guy who's going to have the ball all game, every game, and he's going to do, kind of everything for us as far as creating offense. That's tough because he's going to be out probably just long enough for guys to really adjust and adapt and feel good about their new roles and those kind of things if all goes well. And then you're going to bring him back in and be say, all right, we're going right back to the way we were. Or you're going to kind of neutralize Simmons and his unique talents by saying, hey, this is the way we play now. Figure it out. And now that's something Brett Brown's really going to have to work through. Of course, it could go completely the other way where it's a disaster without him and everybody can't wait for him to get back in the lineup whenever that is.
Last time we had you on, Keith, I believe it was last Wednesday, we were talking about the Horford move to the bench. And you said something interesting, which was you believe that Horford will eventually be back in the starting lineup, that this experiment at some point won't work, and he'll be starting again. So it looked like it worked with a one-game sample size against the Clippers that night. But since then, it's kind of same old Horford in his stint with the Sixers. So what have you seen since the last time we spoke, and how bad has this experiment been so far in your mind?
Yeah, the reason I thought that was we see these kinds of moves happen all the time where it's the move made to shake up a lineup, and maybe it works for the first couple of games, and then it almost always goes right back to whatever the issues were. They still are there because you didn't really fix things. So I think what we're going to see now is whether it's because Simmons is out, Horford is starting, or that's just what they're headed back to. I think we'll really see where this goes kind of going forward here. One of the challenges is, and I know we've beat this horse long since it's been dead, but is the spacing. But I saw a stat the other day that kind of blew my mind. That Horford, when the minutes he's played with Joel Embiid, he's only made 10 3-pointers this year in those minutes when he's been out there with Embiid. And that kind of, to me, says everything you need to know about what a problem it is when those two guys share the floor together.
Keith Smith covers the NBA, NBC Sports, Yahoo Sports, Real GM here on the Sports Bash. And obviously, this ill-timed injury for Ben Simmons has really shaking things up for them. We'll see what happens in the East for them. But the Bucks seemingly have, if you didn't believe in them, you should now, right? I mean, they dismantled the Sixers on Saturday. I know Ben Simmons left that game, but they basically took care of the Raptors last night, too. Two of their top challengers. If somebody is like, you know what, and we've said it here many times, I don't know if I'm all that worried with the Bucks, the matchup. Why is it that maybe people don't believe in them as much as their record suggests you should? Is it like, hey, they were the 1 seed last year, got knocked out. Budenholzer coached the Hawks. They won 60 games, and they got knocked out. What is it about the Bucks that maybe people don't believe in but should?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's the doubts are the fact that Mike Budenholzer teams, they're basically the same exact team in the postseason that they were in the regular season. He puts together systems that win regular season games with no issue at all. It's when you get into the playoffs and then teams are game planning for you because they're going to play you between 4 and 7 games. That's when it gets a little hard for them because as other teams are changing the way they attack on both ends of the floor, the Bucks have been slow under Budenholzer as well as the Hawks were to adjust and change. Now, why you should believe in him, Giannis is unbelievable. He's the best player in the NBA right now. He's absolutely unstoppable. He's averaging 30 points per night in 30 minutes per game, which is, really ridiculous. They've got a deep roster of guys who can step up and make plays. Chris Middleton's absolutely an established all-star. Eric Bledsoe can do some things. David Lopez, you're hard-pressed to find a better center duo in the NBA. And then every guy that they bring in off the bench, they just know their role, they know what they're asked to do, and then go out there and do it. So the fact that they are really just hammering teams night in and night out, and it looked like last night that Toronto was fired up and Toronto was going to make a statement. All of a sudden, the next thing you know, Milwaukee's up 10 and the game really isn't close in the last few minutes. And that's just been the way the Bucks have played all year. They're just taking it to teams, and they don't take their foot off the gas. Curious to see if they do that a little bit down the stretch here. They've got an 8-game lead over the Raptors, who are in second place right now. That's probably to this point where you start thinking about, maybe we should sit Giannis or Middleton or Lopez or some of these other veteran guys a game or two here down the stretch. But even when they've done that this year, it hasn't mattered. The next guy up steps in, plays well, and they just keep winning.
So you just said something. The following is what you said. Giannis is the best in the game right now, and I think there's someone up in Boston that you'd have a legitimate argument for, which is Jason Tatum. The dude is absolutely balling over the past couple weeks here.
Don't get Keith gushing about Tatum now. I don't
listen, he was going to be gushing either way, so I might as well bring it to the table for him to eat it. And Boston's third right now. They're 4.5 games ahead of Philly. They look like they're clicking on all cylinders, and I know you're excited to talk about this here, Keith. How dangerous can they really be?
Yeah, I think they can be really tough. I think the challenge that they bring that's a little unique compared to just about any other team in the playoff field, at least in the Eastern Conference, is they've got 4 guys who can go for 20 to 30 points on any given night. And on some of those nights, they've all done it. And that makes it really, really hard to defend them. One of the things that I talked with some scouts about going into the season was, how are the Celtics going to defend teams like Milwaukee and Philadelphia that are so big compared to the way they're going to be small? And they went through some things that they could do. But then one of the scouts turned it on me and he said, how are those teams going to defend Boston? Who is their second big going to step out and chase around the perimeter? Because nobody wants to deal with that. And you mentioned Tatum. What Tatum is doing now is you look for little signs of guys taking the leap. Well, he's not giving you little signs. He's giving you huge, major, flashing, lights out there signs that he is, really stepping up and becoming a superstar. It's to the point where the Celtics really now, they look for him to bring them home in key moments. They're going to get him the ball. He's going to make plays. Jaylen Brown has been really, really good too, and it's getting a little overshadowed because of just how good Tatum has been. But those two guys, as young guys, and they're aided by 2 veterans, in Gordon Hayward and Kemba Walker, who, unlike the veterans in the past couple of years, are willing to kind of defer and play that secondary role behind the 2 young stars, because I think those guys are at the point in their career where numbers, accolades, all that, that's nice, but they would much rather win. And I think they're looking at it as, hey, these 2 guys, they're our best chance to win.
I asked you about Horford, and then I followed up with Boston. And just to add to that, it just feels like another gotcha moment from Boston to Philly, where Boston now, they have all these guards and wings that can score, and they're dangerous. Jaylen Brown, Tatum, Kemba, and they look really scary. And Philly pays $110 million to get Horford away from Boston, and so far it's just been a complete failure. It's almost like Boston knew once again, like they had a crystal ball for the future.
Yeah, one thing I would say is the Celtics absolutely wanted to keep Al Horford. The challenge was by the time they had the agreement in place to acquire Kemba Walker via sign and trade, they were trying to set up a series of other sign and trade deals, including Kyrie Irving to the Nets, where they could have cleared the necessary, or not cleared, but they would have stayed as an over the cap team and been able to re-sign Horford. Horford had already agreed and said, I'm not going to go back on this to Philadelphia. Well, one of the things that I heard from someone with the Celtics is, we're upset to lose Horford. We wanted to keep him. We're not upset to lose him to Philadelphia because they just didn't believe the fit was going to be there with him and Embiid. The Celtics saw Al Horford as a 5. They said he's got to be a center. That's where he's at in his career. And Horford, for everything great that he's done, he's absolutely committed to, he wants to be a power forward. He wants to be a 4. He doesn't want to play the 5 night in and night out, which is a little strange because that's not what it meant back in the day. There's no Shaquille O'Neals to bang with down in the low post anymore. Those guys don't exist, but he just doesn't want to do that. He wants to be, the 4-man. He wants to be a little bit more out on the perimeter. And because of the way everything fell together, the Celtics upset to lose him to Philadelphia. That was never a major concern for them.
Are you, when you watch Horford, do you see a guy out of place or a guy slowing down?
Both. Yeah, definitely both. I see he can't bring it every single night like he could once upon a time. One of the things I go back to is something that an NBA coach told me was, if you remember back when they played the Bucks last year in the playoffs, and in that game 1 when Boston won, and they really handled Milwaukee on the road pretty well, and Horford really defended Giannis and did great things. There were a lot of people who were like, oh, geez, the Celtics kind of had their number in the regular season. Maybe they're going to pull off this upset. And one thing that an NBA coach told me was, well, they just had a week off because they had swept the Indiana Pacers the week before, in 4 games, the series before that. And they said, Horford's not going to be able to do this every other night. And that proved true. After that first game, he just didn't have it anymore. And now we're seeing that in the regular season. He can get up and bring it on occasion, but he just can't be that guy night in and night out. And then when you talk about the fit issues, there's a lot of things there that are starting to exacerbate that, because when you're living on the perimeter like he is, but you're not delivering out there, that's really tough.
By the way, Brett Brown speaking now on how long Ben Simmons will be out. He says, I'm going to stay away from all that. As always, I'll let the club lead the charge when it comes to updates. So, obviously the questions are already going to start with Ben Simmons. But I think, obviously, there's a lot going on in this East that is – kind of adding up that the Sixers, even if they're healthy, look to have an uphill battle of trying to get out of this thing with the way that Boston has emerged. Toronto is way better than anybody thought. I think the Bucks are better than they were, and they were the best team last year in terms of the Eastern Conference. You throw Miami into the mix, and you got an Indiana team. There's 6 teams, so for you to be having questions at this stage of the season, it just doesn't seem feasible that you're going to get it all together, a month from now and be able to put yourselves on a run.
Yeah, it's going to be really hard. The thing I look at is whether it be Miami or Philadelphia, if you're in that 4-5 line, that's a tough first-round series. They're going to really battle. That's one, if everything holds the way it is now, you look at it and say, yeah, that's probably going, 6-7 games. Then you got to play the Bucks. So let's just say everything falls right and you can somehow upset Milwaukee. That's, again, 6 games at very best, but probably 7, pull off the upset. And then before you can even talk about the NBA Finals, now you got to get through likely Toronto or Boston. And that's where it makes it so hard. That's why I think for the Celtics and the Raptors, it's been so important for them get out of that 4-5 matchup, because you want to avoid the Bucks as long as you can, but you also want to set yourself up for a little bit of an easier first-round series. With Indiana, I don't want to knock them. They're a good team, but you just don't fear them the way you do maybe some of the other teams. And what you'd like to see, obviously, is get up to the 2 line and play Brooklyn or Orlando in the first round, if depending on who lands in 7-8 spots. And that's what you're kind of looking at. If you're in that 4-5, it's just you're going to have to go through 3 complete battles just to even talk about making the finals, and that's really, really hard to do.
Keith, back to the Sixers here and their rotation and lack of depth, I guess you could say, at the point guard spot for sure. The buyout market, is there anything there that you think could be of value to the 76ers? Isaiah Thomas, do Dion Waiters. I know some other names are out there.
Yeah, and then the only guy who maybe Isaiah Thomas, but it would really take you're going to have to bend things quite a bit to cover for him defensively. Now they've got the players who can do it, but that's maybe the only guy who could come in. But I don't see a clear guy you would cut to make room for IT at this point. And there's nobody who's a bigger fan of IT and hopes he gets another shot at this thing. He actually played pretty well for Washington offensively this year. I think he's up over 40% from three and can still score the ball when called upon to do that. It's just everything else in this game is tough, and it really causes you to work around it. But anything else, it's just not there. I think maybe had they known about the Simmons injury a week before, really maybe just before the All-Star break or so, you might have gotten in on the Reggie Jackson sweepstakes there. Not that he's a great player, but I think he would have helped quite a bit as a guy who can handle the ball, do some scoring, also run the offense a little bit for you. But right now at that position, there's just not much out there. There's nobody there. And Dion Waiters, he's just not a point guard. It's just adding another guy who's best playing off the ball to your roster versus a guy who's really good with the ball in his hands, and he's certainly not going to create for anybody else.
All right, we'll get Keith's take on last night's Zion versus LeBron matchup. And we talked a lot about Zion earlier in that this guy had more hype than anybody I can remember, even probably more than LeBron James had it, because quite frankly, the social media wasn't there. The television coverage was a lot different back then. I don't know if you could say he surpassed that, but he has certainly exceeded my expectations.
Yeah, he's lived up to everything that we hoped he would be, and you're absolutely right on the hype. I remember at this time a couple of years ago, we were all watching him play games against LaMelo Ball and AAU, and now then his games at Duke when he played were must-watch TV because you wanted to see what does this guy do. Almost looked like a man among boys, and now he's come in. It was delayed, so that kind of built that hype and that intrigue and that mystery around it. And he's come in and he's really delivered. There was points in that game last night, but I didn't watch it live because the Celtics were playing. I was covering that. But when I rewatched it, he was just ragdolling people and kind of tossing guys around and getting what he wanted and moving around. And that was in a game where you had LeBron James and Anthony Davis on the floor. So I think Zion is proving he's going to be really, really special as long as they can keep his health under control and keep him in the lineup. I think the sky's the limit for this guy because right now he's still doing so much just completely based off instinct versus really understanding how to play.
All right. Good stuff, Keith. Of course, the NBA playoffs will be here in about a month, April 15th. About 2 months, I should say. About a month and a half, I guess, is better. April 15th, the last week of the season. Sixers have about a month to figure some things out. We got great races, and we'll see. The Bucks running away with the East, but really everything else behind that. And, oh, by the way, are you going Zion or the Field for the 8th spot?
Boy, that's tough. I'm starting to lean towards the Pelicans. I know they lost last night, but the Grizzlies are so banged up. The Pelicans are now only 3.5 games out, and they have one of the easiest closing schedules to go. It looked a little more daunting when they had to climb the Spurs and the Trailblazers and the Kings to get there, but what looked like a couple weeks ago, like it was all locked in, the Grizzlies' injuries and the slide for them in the standings has brought now there's 6 teams in the race in the West, and we'll see ultimately who comes. But I would probably go with the Pelicans, which Lakers-Pelicans first-round series, sign me up for that. I'll take 4, 5, 6 games of that, whatever we get.
No doubt. All right, Keith Smith, NBC Sports, Yahoo Sports, Real GM. He appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thanks, pal.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.